On November 9th, 2016, I think the majority of America woke up, saw the results of the presidential election, and looked something like this. I mean, whether you are Republican, Democrat, or Independent, everyone was surprised by the presidential election. Every poll had Hillary Clinton in the lead. The New York Times at one point gave her a 93% chance of winning, but instead it was Trump who won with 47% of the vote. Trump's election was met with both celebratory rallies and peaceful protests. But in the month immediately following the election, the Southern Poverty Law Center recorded over 1,000 incidents of hateful harassment. This compared to 5,860 incidents that were recorded by the FBI in all of 2015. The nation seems more divided than ever, not just along political lines, but also along racial, gender, religious, and nationalist lines. Issues of diversity and inclusion are now at the forefront of the conversation. Debates are raging. Protests seem to be happening on a weekly basis over new immigration policies, women and LGBT rights, whether or not our federal government should be tracking Muslims. I've had so many conversations with my colleagues who are also driving diversity and inclusion within their technology companies, who are wondering, how do we handle these issues, and where do we go from here? But before we can ask ourselves that question, I think we also have to ask ourselves, how did we get here in the first place? Let's start by defining what I mean when I say diversity and inclusion within the context of the technology industry. Diversity, in its broadest form, refers to all the differences and similarities that make each person unique. But when we talk about diversity in tech, what we're referring to primarily is those groups that are underrepresented within the industry, typically Blacks, Latinos, and women. On the other hand, inclusion means taking all of that diversity and leveraging it to its fullest potential so that everyone can have a sense of belonging no matter what your background. Because there have been so many research studies done on the benefits of diversity, where companies that are more racially and gender diverse perform better financially, where you see more diverse teams generating more innovative ideas. Understandably, the tech industry has really tried to embrace more diversity and inclusion in its ranks, but unfortunately with less than stellar results. Case in point, just 1% of employees at tech giants Airbnb, Facebook, Google, and Yahoo are Black. And this number hasn't changed since 2014 when these companies first started reporting their demographics. And this in spite of the fact that they are pouring millions of dollars into their diversity programs and publicly pledging to do better. Why has there been so little progress on diversity and inclusion in tech? I think it's because Silicon Valley lives in a bubble that has been created primarily by white, straight males from elite educational backgrounds. That means that they find it very difficult to relate to other marginalized experiences that are not their own. The other major reason why tech was so surprised by the results of the election is because they have a very narrow definition of diversity that I referred to earlier. This almost singular focus on race and gender means we don't tend to consider other marginalized experiences like those communities in Middle America that really helped to drive that election result. We've traditionally defined the digital divide as an issue of access to technology, those who have it versus those who don't. I think we actually need to expand that definition to include those who can fully participate in and directly benefit from the technology revolution versus those who can't. I'm not talking about whether or not you have the ability to download the latest Netflix show or Skype with your friends. I'm really talking about whether or not people feel like their lives are better off as a direct result of advancements in technology. And clearly, that is not true for everyone in the country. The working class in particular have been disrupted, displaced, and disenfranchised because technology has not benefited them. Factories have closed because technology has enabled globalization. Jobs have literally been taken over by robots, and towns have been neglected because their best and brightest leave and never come back. Then Trump came along and promised to change all of that, so almost half of America voted for that change. Now, what role did tech play in achieving that result? Technology is defined as the application of science to invent useful things or to solve problems. But too often, the problems that are being solved by the tech industry are at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In a lot of cases, we tend to categorize ourselves as solving problems even beyond self-actualization. And ignoring those basic needs at the bottom for food, water, and safety. In tech's hubris, people often lament this perception that there isn't enough diverse talent that's qualified to fill tech roles. But I haven't really seen a lot of tech companies going to middle America and training people to learn how to code. Nor are they hiring for roles outside of their tech hubs on the coasts or opening offices in more depressed areas of the United States to help revitalize them. I was once talking to a tech company that wanted to hire more diverse talent in its engineering organization, but required that they all be co-located in Santa Clara, California. And they wouldn't budge on that. And so I had to very politely tell them that they needed to re-examine their commitment to diversity and inclusion. Thank you. Tech should really enable people at all levels of Maslow's hierarchy to meet their needs through jobs, education, and investments. And by expanding this definition of diversity to include all marginalized communities, tech might actually have a shot at increasing their demographic diversity beyond that 1%. So, how do we make this real in an era where diversity and inclusion is not likely to be prioritized by our federal government? Tech companies have a choice to make ahead of them, and if you're familiar with the Matrix, you know the analogy I'm about to do. Do they take the red pill and put more resources and action behind diversity and inclusion efforts as immigration, religion, and other diversity issues become flashpoints in our national debate? Or do they take the blue pill and ignore it all to maintain the status quo, all in the name of what's best for the business? Some people will double down and take the red pill. There's a sense of urgency and momentum that is driving people together around these issues that I haven't seen in my 15 years of doing this work. People who have never supported diversity and inclusion actively in some way in the past are now picking up the phone, calling their legislators, signing petitions, participating in protests. Companies that have been apolitical in the past are now abandoning those stances and taking very clear stands and saying more diversity and more inclusion, which is really wonderful to see. Others will choose the blue pill and get pressured by their shareholders to focus on other important business issues, like new immigration policies that will tighten labor availability, or new trade policies that may make doing business on a global scale more difficult. These companies will still say that they're truly committed to diversity and inclusion, but taking action on it will fall lower and lower on the priority list until it quietly falls off the edge. For those of you who choose to take the red pill, I urge you to make focusing on diversity and inclusion your #1 priority. Because without voices from all walks of life at the table, the tech industry will continue to be surprised in the same way that we were surprised last November. So, what's the game plan? First, develop your empathy for all marginalized communities. Visit them, talk to them, understand what is going on in those communities, and then work with them to make a plan to fix it. In Van Jones' series, The Messy Truth, he visits Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, to talk to people from all sides of the political spectrum. He doesn't necessarily agree with their positions or their logic, but he comes away with a better understanding of what drives them and what unites them in their humanity. If tech does its own version of this, tech leaders will be much better positioned to make business decisions that take into account all marginalized communities and be more capable of creating inclusive environments within their companies that embrace people from all different backgrounds. Next, support organizations that will provide technology access and job training to underserved communities. That doesn't just mean urban communities, but rural America as well. In Oakland, there's an organization called Yes We Code that provides technology access, training, and resources to 100,000 underrepresented minorities, connecting them to careers in technology. What if tech companies got together and created a coalition to do something similar in middle and small town America? Imagine if we could connect all of these different organizations together. The talent pipeline would become so much more diverse and robust. Last, invest in areas tech has disrupted. Pour your capital into places like Detroit, Scranton, and South Bend, Indiana. Probably one of the best examples of a city that has transformed itself, reimagined itself as a technology hub, where they've taken blighted industrial land and turned it into thriving technology data centers. Healing this new digital divide will take time, attention, and hard work. Tech cannot sit back on its laurels at this critical inflection point in the history of progress for diversity and inclusion. We must all take action if we're truly going to move the needle around diversity in tech. Whether you are on the left or the right, a Hillary or a Trump supporter, a white middle-class, working-class farmer, or a Syrian refugee, I ask you to please meet in the middle, find a way to connect with each other and respect each other's diversity, and include everyone in your hopes for a brighter, stronger future. Thank you.